Right, yeah. So my name is Daniel. I'm a senior software engineer at the BBC. And today I wanted to talk to you about Next.js. It's going to be an introduction to Next.js. Hopefully, you will come out of this session knowing more about the features that Next.js has to offer, how you can use it, when building your own web applications, how it kind of compares to other web frameworks out there. Uh, and yeah, hopefully you'll come out of the session knowing a bit more about Next. Before we actually dive in, I wanted to cover kind of the basics. So what is Next.js? You might have heard of it, but it might not be clear to you what it is. So it's a front-end web framework for building Node and React web apps. There is a framework called Next.js, which I believe is for Vue, but that's not Next. Next is designed for writing React front-end apps, and it uses Node for the server-side aspects of your web app. It's open source. As of today, it has 65,000 stars on GitHub. It's a very popular framework. It has a huge community of developers behind it, contributing on a day-to-day basis, and it also has a core team that is, fully dedicated to add new features and fixes, etc. Next is quite opinionated. It's in that sense maybe different from other frameworks, but in my opinion, the way in that Next.js is opinionated, it only really helps. It doesn't get in your way, and we'll see a bit more about what that means later. It's comparable to CRA or Create React App and Gatsby. I say it's comparable because maybe it's not a fair comparison. Next.js, I think, it covers. It's a bit of a bigger framework compared to CRA or Gatsby. It has more features, and we'll see why later. So specifically, what we will be covering today, obviously there is limited time. We have limited time, so I wanted to focus on some key kind of aspects of Next. So first of all, we want to see how you can structure your Next.js application. Next.js kind of uses conventional configuration. You'll see how you need directories to be named in a certain way, as well as file names. We'll also see how routing works in Next. Obviously, routing is quite a fundamental thing in any web application, right? We'll see how Next gives you not just server-side routing, but it gives you client-side routing, so your applications have a feel of like a single page app. We'll also see how to write a backend API in Next. So differently from other front-end frameworks, Next actually gives you a way of writing a backend, for you to talk to external HTTP services and, serve data that your front-end can use to render a view. We'll see how you can use error pages. It's quite a common use case in your web app to have to render an error page, like a 404 error page or a 500 error page, and we'll see how Next.js supports that out of the box. We'll also see page rendering forms. You might see in the Next.js docs as data fetching. And this is probably, if you have heard of Next but maybe not used it, this is probably the first thing that always comes up is server-side rendering and how Next.js allows you to do server-side rendering. But also more recently, the Next.js core team has put a lot of effort on static site generation, or SSG. And we'll see how those two different options compare and kind of what the trade-offs are, for you to consider where to use one or the other. We'll see as well image optimization. Nowadays web applications are quite rich. They have loads of media, loads of images, and we'll see how Next.js allows you to have serve your images in a more efficient way. especially for mobile apps. It's quite a big deal. And then finally, and hopefully if we have enough time, we'll get to see a deployment to Vercel of our kind of mini e-commerce app. A bit about what we won't be covering today as well. I think it's good to set expectations. We won't be focusing on CSS styling at all. In fact, I have some snippets kind of ready to drop in to style the different components and things in the web app. We also won't be covering anything about testing. Again, it's limited time. I don't intend to kind of build the web app as something that you would ship to production using something. I'm a strong believer of things like TDD and BDD, but that's not the point of this talk. The point of this talk is to show you a bit about what Next can offer. So yeah, there won't be no testing covered. And then finally, there's some assumed knowledge. Well, first of all, like React and kind of the React basics of how that works. I might not be explaining everything about that. I want to just focus on Next. And then the context API and React hooks I'm also going to be using. If you have any questions about that, just feel free to ask in the chat, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So as you have seen already from kind of the meetup ad, we're going to be building today an e-commerce. It's really a grocery store, and it's not a full-blown e-commerce. Obviously, we only have 2 hours of time. It's going to be like a oversimplified version of an e-commerce, but hopefully you're gonna get to see how you can use this Next.js feature to actually build a full-blown e-commerce if you wanted to. So let me show you first kind of what the finished web app looks like and what we'll be working towards. So this is the web app. So you can see in there we have got a product listing page with a lot of kind of product cards. You can click on one of these products, and that takes you to a product details page. Renders a bigger image, has some description, the price. You can also add to your basket. That adds your item there. You can see a little counter in red in there of how many items, distinct items you have in your basket. I can also add to the basket from here. If I add multiple items of kind of the same product, it doesn't increment the counter because it's only counting distinct products. You also have like a little Navbar at the top that is always there regardless of which page you're on. I can go to the basket page, and you get the items that you have added to the basket so far. You can increment the quantity of them. You can remove them altogether, from the basket, and then it shows you the price. There's this little proceed to checkout button in there, but actually that doesn't do anything. We won't be doing that bit today. We're only going to be focusing on this kind of product listing, the product details page, and the basket today. So yeah, we're going to be building this from scratch. So yeah, without further ado, let's start coding. Let me bring up my terminal first. Close this. Close this one as well. Right, we're going to start with a clean slate. The first thing I want to show you about is a CLI tool provided by Next called Create Next App. And that basically scaffolds for you a really kind of simple Next.js application that you can build from. So let's use that. Let's pick a name. Let's say my grocery store. That will install for you, React, React DOM, and Next.js, kind of all of the basic dependencies you need to spin up a Next.js app. That's finished now. So if I cd onto my project, I'm going to open it in VS Code, and I'll show you what's been scaffolded for us. So, we have got our node modules, all of the dependencies installed. We have a pages folder. And the fact that it's called pages is quite important because Next.js looks for this particular folder whenever it's trying to figure out which pages your web application has. For example, the home page or the index page that has got this kind of basic homepage. I'm actually going to spin up the web app in a second so we can see in the browser what that looks like. We also got this API folder within pages, and this is where we will be implementing a backend API. It gives you like a hello world type of backend API. There's a public folder. This is where you can host any kind of media assets that you need to expose in your web application. Think of your robots.txt file, the favicon, images that you have in your web app. All of that kind of goes in that public folder. This is the kind of asset that you would be exposing via your CDN, your content delivery network. It has a styles folder. And Next.js out of the box supports integrating with different kind of CSS frameworks. Today we're going to be using Tailwind. I'm not going to go into details of Tailwind. I'm purely using Tailwind because it made it a lot easier for me to style things. But the main point is that Next.js integrates quite nicely with different CSS frameworks, and you got options. Package.json, there isn't much here. You just got these 3 different dependencies, and then you've got these scripts to just make it easy for you to kind of develop. So yeah, let's start by looking at what the app looks like. Usually when you're developing in Next, the first thing you do is you run npm run dev. And what that will do for you is set up your development server with hot reloading and kind of all of the nice tools that you'd expect from modern front-end development. Let's try that. Right, so there it is. Welcome to Next.js. There isn't much, just a few links, but at least it gives you a starting point. I don't think these links, they're external links. So just take you to the docs. Yeah, it's quite a basic page. So we're also going to be today, let me install ESlint just to make it a bit easier for me to, make less mistakes, because I'm going to be using JavaScript. Typically, for my production applications, I would go for TypeScript, but I didn't want to kind of take away the focus from Next too much. Hopefully I'll complete quickly. Okay, we also need to initialize our ESlint configuration files. Yes, JavaScript modules, React, nope. And then I also want to use Node. Yes. Right, so we might need to tweak a bit about that ESlint configuration, but we'll do that later. So like I said, I'm going to be using Tailwind, so let's do that now. I've got the link to the Tailwind documentation here. See, Tailwind CSS. There's an integration guide. There it is. We're going to be using Next.js version 10, actually 10 point something, but it means that we can use kind of the latest version of Tailwind. Let's install that. Create my configuration file. So this will scaffold for me like a Tailwind config file and this post CSS config file that we need. Okay, and then so that would have been created for me already. I believe the only thing I have got left to do is adding this bit in to make sure that styles that are not used are tree shaked in production builds. So hopefully it'll make my app run a bit faster. Okay, so that's hopefully Tailwind done. Let's run the dev server. I'm actually going to leave my dev server on in here and open a different split to run any other commands on the right. Let's make sure everything's still working. Yep. Okay. Right. So with that out of the way, we got a basic skeleton app now. What I want to do is start working on the product list page or the home page of the grocery store. So I'm going to repurpose this index page here. Let me delete everything there. Just add an empty div for now. And say hello world. Just got hello world in there. I've got a snippet actually that I can use. Right. So something Next does, which I actually don't like, not Next, but Create Next app, is that it names my the files where I render React as a JavaScript, a JS file. So I'm gonna rename those to JSX, and that's to better kind of signal that I'm gonna be using JSX or React within these files. It's a nice way of kind of differentiating things. So hopefully now, if I do product list, right, that gives me that. I have got a few warnings. So React in JSX scope. React must be in scope, right? So that error, you could fix it by just importing React in your page, but in more recent version of React and also Next, you don't need to do that anymore. So I'm gonna get rid of that warning in my ESlint rules. Is React in JSX scope, and here you are. I'm just gonna turn that off. Okay, so that's gone now. So we should have a product list unstyled with just like the image of a pizza. But now let's add a bit of styling for this. What I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to repurpose this file, rename it to custom.css. And this is where I'm going to be dropping my styles for the different components. So I'm going to delete all of this stuff. And right, I've got this little snippet here for the product listing style. I also need this. And yeah, this is something you need in Tailwind. So if you want to kind of write your own Tailwind class utilities, you got to add that layer in there, and then add your custom classes. I have to say, this is not the way that Tailwind really recommends for you to use it. Tailwind, so it's a utility first framework, I think is the technical term for it. And the recommended approach is for you to use all of these classes or utility CSS classes within your components. So instead of me having a class name called product list, what I should probably be doing is just having container mx auto empty for all of that in the component itself. I didn't want to do that for this talk, even though it's best practices. I didn't want to do that because it would be too distracting and it would make the component look super easy. So I wanted to keep the markup simple as possible for the sake of the demo. But it's important that you know what is considered, best practice. Hopefully that gives me, right, it won't give it yet. So I've got custom CSS, but I need to import that. And because I want those styles available for the whole app, I'm going to be doing that here in this _app file. Whoops. Oops, I've got another ESlint warning, React prop types. Right, I'm not going to add prop types as I go because that would take too much of my time. But just going to be turning that off from the ESlint rules. Okay, so that's that warning gone. So I forgot to mention what _app is. And this is not just any arbitrary name. This is a file that is kind of your master template, if you will, to all of your pages. So no matter which page in your web app you are rendering, my app will kind of wrap that page. So anything you put in _app will decorate your pages. We'll see how we can use that for the Navbar, which we want present in every page of our grocery store. And this component here that you're getting passed as a prop is actually the page component, and these are the page props. So yeah, by importing my custom CSS there, hopefully, not yet. That's compiled. Oh, I think I know what's going on. So I've got this globals.css that I need to update. And I need to add the Tailwind base styles, which are somewhere here. This one's. Yeah, so this gives me kind of all of the base classes that Tailwind has to offer. Let's see. Okay, so I've got a little product card in there. So we're making progress. Now, obviously, we want to render multiple of these based on some kind of real data. Typically, in your grocery store or e-commerce, you would have, I don't know, millions of this. But today, what I have got is like a hard-coded list of products. So let's add that in. I'm going to add like a data folder to my project. Let's call it products.json. And I've got another one of these magic snippets. Right, and that's added roughly around 95 different products, each of which has a description, a price, an image that I still haven't got in the project, but we'll see about that in a bit, and an ID, so some kind of identifier that we can use in our database later to identify the product and things like that. So next up, I want to actually render all of those products in the home page. What I'm going to do first is like a really kind of hacky way. Say I've got my product elements. Say product. And I need all of those product elements. Right, it's missing a key. So every time you are kind of generating React elements off an array, you have to add a key for them. I'm just going to use the product ID for that. And obviously I need my product data, which I'm going to import from data. Data products.json. Okay, so that's not all. We want the product description here. The add to trolley, I'm just going to leave it, the event handler empty for now. We also want the price to be the correct price. And we want the image. The image, we're going to look into that in a second. Let's see how this is looking. Right, so we got a lot of this. At the moment, it's the same image being reused. Let's fix that. So I got image. I'm just going to reuse the description for that. Okay, so I don't have the images. However, my image field for each product is already pointing at a relative URL /images. And as I was explaining before, if you want to expose images or any kind of user-defined assets, you can do that via your public folder. So I'm going to be creating a new folder here called images. And I'm going to put in there all of the product images that I have got. Let me copy that from here. Images. Right. Right, so that gives me all of that list of images there. Hopefully now. Cool. Okay, so we got a product list. There is something here that is not right, and I want to fix, and that is we are pulling into our client-side bundle, onto the client-side application, all of this product data, because we're using it in our render kind of method of React. And in a real application, you wouldn't do that, because if you have millions of these products, obviously you wouldn't have any of that client side. Typically, you'd have some kind of API where you can fetch that data from, or you would have some kind of server-side rendering in place to make sure that the HTML, when it's served, it contains all of the products already. And this is kind of the first opportunity that we have to see Next in action and how it shines. So I'm going to be using, I'm putting here in a comment, SSR or server-side rendering to solve that problem. What I want to do is whenever a user requests that page, it comes back with the whole kind of markup for all of the products kind of ready to use. And that is really good for search engines, for SEO, because that data can be indexed quite easily. So the way you do SSR in Next is, and this has changed over the years, but right now, you have to define this special method called getServerSideProps. And that is an asynchronous function. Obviously, if you want to do some kind of external API call or something like that, you need it to be asynchronous. It gives you a context, and that context contains information about the request. And from it, you can return a list of props. And those props will be passed onto your page. So in this case, what I want those props to be is my products. And I want to fetch my products from some kind of data store. I'm going to call it the product store. Get all products. get all products. I'm going to add a lib folder with my product store. Let's do that now. Right, and for now, all I need is just a method to get all the products. I'm going to make this method asynchronous, but it doesn't actually need to be asynchronous. All I'm going to return from it is the product data I've got there. You know, in a real kind of world application, you would probably be pulling this off a database. To keep things simple for now, I'm just going to pull it off the same product JSON. But the main kind of takeaway from this is you can use get server-side props to actually compute all of this data in a backend. So none of this will run client-side. Your product declared, so it's never used. Of course, as I don't need that. Okay, and for now, we don't need the context either. Next, we'll make sure that those props that I have defined here are passed onto my page. So now, if I do that instead, products.map. So that way, I have got a clean separation between my front end and this kind of data fetching happening in my backend. So hopefully that should work. There we go. That still works. Nothing breaks. I could inspect the HTML and show you that the HTML being served off the request directly contains all of the product list, but the HTML is being minified, so that won't be very helpful. Right, so we got this product list page. What should we do next? Next up, we can do the product details. So we want to link to another page. By clicking, at the moment, if I click in any of these product cards, nothing happens. And what we want to do there is transition onto a different page. And we'll see how you can do that in Next. So the first thing is creating a new page, right? And this is a bit of a special page because whenever you click one of these items, ideally in the format of the URL, you would have something like the product ID or the product description. So that URL is dynamic. It has a variable part, right? The kind of the product identifier. So let's see how we can do that in Next. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it product. And inside that product folder, let's create a file called product ID. And pay special attention to these square brackets. Took me a while kind of getting used to that, but what the square brackets mean, they're very important, is that that part of the URL will be dynamic. And next, we'll make sure that whenever you are requesting something like, I don't know, product slash, 1234, right? That part that is variable will get passed to you as part of kind of the routing information. We'll see how we can actually get a hold of that. Also, right, so another thing that is really important is don't know if you may have noticed already, is that each file inside Pages maps to kind of a URL, a page and a URL in your application. So for example, the index file is mapping to your slash URL, your home URL. The product/product ID will match to product/ and then kind of the product identifier, and then we'll see about API in a bit. Right, but for now, let's just create our product details page. And right, I forgot to have it as a JSX file. I'm going to use one of my magic snippets. You also want to make sure whenever you are writing these pages, you export at the end. It's got to be the default export, otherwise Next will throw an error. Okay, so hopefully now, if I go to this URL, actually 1234, that should render my product details. And it does. It looks like that because we don't have any styles, but we'll fix that in a second. Okay. Right. So just to recap the URL, product/1234. This part will be dynamic. Doesn't matter what I put there. Next, we'll always make sure that any requests with this URL format will land on this page that I've just created, the product ID page. So how do we link to it from the product list page? Let's see how we can do that. So I've already got an on-click handler. I want to make sure whenever that div is clicked, basically, that it takes you to that page. So I'm going to call my click handler, let's say view product details. View product details. Right, and there we're going to have to product. I'll explain in a bit what I'm doing here. Product ID. So I've got an event handler for clicking. Actually, I need that product ID value. And I'm going to be passing that here. Product ID. Right, so that's going to be the variable part of my URL. And so I need this router, and this router will be given to me by Next. And I don't know if you're familiar with hooks. So there are different ways how you could get a hold of the router. But if you're into kind of functional React and you like hooks, I would probably recommend you just using the use router hook. Which you can get from Next router. Okay, so on click, view product details, and then router.push that URL. And that will make sure that Next.js handles that kind of page redirect or that page transition for you. Let's see that in action. There we go. So I can click on that. You wouldn't be seeing the correct product details, but it does take you to that page. And if you notice on the URL, it's using the correct kind of product ID there. I'm using the product ID in the URL. I guess for a real e-commerce app, you might want to use something like the product description, for SEO purposes or things like that. But I just thought I would keep it simple. Right, so we've got redirect. We just want to make sure now we're rendering the correct product details. So I'm going to pass a prop here to this page. And guess what? We can use server-side rendering for multiple pages. It could be any page. You could have server-side rendering. So I'm actually going to copy this method here and use it for my product details as well. I'm going to call this get product by ID. And we need that product ID. So server side, how do you get access to the different parts of a URL is another important thing. think I kind of touched on this previously, but get server-side props gives you a context object. And in that context, you can get the variable part of your URL by having context.params. The name of that variable part. So that's product ID. And the reason why it's product ID is because I have named my page here, product ID, within square brackets. If I had named this foo, then this would be foo, not product ID. I need now that get product by ID. Lib product store. Right, I'm gonna make this async as well. But again, it doesn't really need to be. I'm only doing it to show you that if it was some kind of external database call, it could perfectly be asynchronous. Right, and that takes a product ID. Okay, so I've got some details. This wouldn't be products, this would be details, and this would be details. Okie dokes. So hopefully this could just be details.image. Details.description. I'm gonna leave the long product description as lorem ipsum because I don't have a long description for the product. Okay, then we just need to update the price. And actually, this will be the fractional part of the price. I'm going to say price parts in 1. And this will be price parts in 0. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split the price by dot and then get the different. Yeah, I get like the integer part and its floating part separately. Sorry, it's fractional part. So that'll be split by a dot. Okay, and we only want to render the fractional part if it exists. Right, let's see that in action. That is not good because I called it details.split. That should be .price. Okay, so details undefined. Props details. I wonder if I'm getting the correct product ID here. In fact, this is a good opportunity to see how you can debug certain problems. So like when you're server-side rendering, I'm going to console log the product ID I'm getting, but also the whole context, actually, see what's coming back in the context. Refresh that page. Oh, okay. That's actually working now. I'm not sure why it wasn't before. Okay. I'll show you anyways what this looks like. Right, so I've got context.query.productID and context.params.productID. So it passes in both objects. And it has a bunch more information about the request. It has a context.request and context.response, which are kind of native Node.js request and response objects that you can use. You could even do a redirect if you want it from inside your get server side props and all kind of things. Okay, that seems to be working now. Right, so the next bit I wanted to show you is around error pages. Let's say, for example, that you are requesting a product that is not in your product list, something that doesn't exist. So let's do one like this. What will happen at this time? I think it will crash. Come on. Oh, right, okay. Let's try that again. Right, it crashes. It crashes because it's trying to find that product ID from my product store, can't find it. So fortunately, what you can do here is you can say, okay, if I don't have the details for that product, if it doesn't exist, I'm gonna have this special flag called not found, which by default is gonna be false, but if I have no details, no product details, I'll then set it to true. Then I'm gonna pass that here. And this is a special kind of flag that you can give to get server-side props to tell it, give me back a 404 response code and render an error page. If I try that, now I get this 404. This page could not be found. So that's a much better user experience, isn't it? Now, in your web app, you wouldn't want the default Next.js error page. You probably want to customize that. And luckily, Next allows you to do that by you can create a special page, let's say 404.jsx, and that's a special 404 page that you can use. So I'm going to call it my custom 404 error page. And export that. Oops, I need a link as well. I haven't actually explained what this link is, but I'll do in a second. Let's see the error page. And that is my custom error page. You can have whatever styles you like in there. It's totally flexible. It's also got this little link in there to take you back to the product list that I've added, take you back to the grocery store. You remember previously when we navigated to the product details, how I did it via a click handler called view product details, and I was using router. So that's one way of doing client-side navigation in Next and use your routing. But a different way, which is actually more common, is to use Next.js links. So you can import a link from NextLink, and all it needs is the relative URL in your application where it should take you, and an anchor tag inside. It could be other things that it wasn't an anchor tag. It's actually quite flexible. You can render different children to link, but typically you'd find the link accompanied by an anchor tag. And yeah, if I click that, that takes me back to my listing page. It's important as well to notice that when I do that, I'm not seeing a full page reload. So Next gives you a single page app kind of feel. And it does that because it supports client-side routing and client-side navigation. Also, one more point on the error page is that I've overridden customized my error page for 404 response codes or HTTP errors, which means if I visit some random URL in the website, bar, that error page will also be used. So you get a consistent experience across all your error pages, all your 404 errors in your web app. You might be wondering, okay, what if it's a 500 error or some other kind of error? How do I do that? And let me bring up the docs. But Next has you covered. NextJS customers. So yeah, this is an example of a customer 404 page. It's exactly what I've just done. But you can have also a 500 error page. And now let's say you need something that wasn't a 404 or 500. You can kind of have a generic error page, which will apply to any kind of error code that you have. And you can have your own logic in it. But what you'll tend to find with Next is that they put a lot of effort and focus on the more common use cases. Because 404 and 500 are so common, such a common need in your web app, then they treat that as kind of first-class errors, to support. So that's custom error pages. Right, the next bit I want to do is the navbar. In your web app, you probably want some kind of navbar across all of your pages. And the way you can do that in Next is by using this _app file. Whenever you want some kind of logic that is common across your entire application, _app is kind of the perfect place for it. Let me first create the navbar component. I'm going to create a components folder. This folder, by the way, could be called anything. Like Next doesn't care about where you put your React components. I'm just going to call it components because that's quite a normal kind of convention to use. And then I want a navbar. Oops. It's quite a long component, that one. Right, so my navbar is just going to have the kind of the brand at the top, saying just Next.js e-commerce, a link to the product listing, and a link to the basket. Nothing too fancy. And then this counter, we'll see how we can update that counter in a bit. Right, let's pull the navbar in. Oops, and I might want a fragment for this. And then my navbar here, let's say. Okay. Components, navbar. Right, so I've got a navbar, not a very good looking one. But as usual, I'm going to add some styles for it. Navbar. Right, I've got a navbar there. The moment it doesn't do anything, well, it tries to go to the basket page, but that doesn't exist yet. So let's fix some of those links. Right, so as I was explaining earlier, if you want to do like client-side navigation, you want to use routing in Next, you typically use links for that, the link component. Link, and then I need an href. Then we want the same for the basket. Okay. This one here. Oh, probably missing an href here. I think this is actually going to be slash as well. Okay, so actually has if I hover over it, I get the pointer icon. So that's the link kind of doing that for me. Get the shop as well there. And it doesn't do anything because I'm on that URL already. Now, the more important point here is if I go to my product details page, you can see the navbar is still there. And that navbar doesn't need to really re-render or anything because the only thing that's changing is my page here. That's all it changes. My transitions, you can see they are all client side. There's no full page reload involved, so I can click on any of this. And yeah, it gives you like a really kind of single page app feel. Next up, I want to now start looking into the basket, implementing the basket. And this is, I think this will be a good opportunity for us to look into how you can implement a backend API and making calls to something like a database in Next. So let's start with an API. So I'm given this kind of hello file. I'm gonna rename that to let's say basket.js, and this is gonna be an API that I can query via /API/basket. Like any page in Next, it uses the file system, literally the files you have on the pages, to determine what the URL looks like. And that's no different for API page. In fact, it's called API pages, which I find slightly confusing, but hey. So that's my basket. Now in the basket, let's say I'm gonna be making an HTTP post that looks like this, my product ID. And that will, let's say, save that product in my database. And for my database today, I'm going to be using DynamoDB. I'm not going to go into a lot of details of Dynamo, just a really high level, but we're going to be implementing a little, like really simple data access layer to talk to Dynamo. But yeah, this is pretty much what my backend is going to do. Now, I actually made a mistake here that I realized only after writing the second line. So I'm writing API. So my URL is going to be API basket and then the product ID, similar to the product ID kind of details page. So this wouldn't work. In fact, I need a folder called basket. And then inside that folder, I need, again, the square brackets. That also works for APIs. And the product ID, which is going to be the variable part of my URL. Okay, so I can get my product ID off the request, similar to how I did it in get server-side props, if you remember that. And I think I can say request.query, maybe params, I'm not sure actually, product.id. And I'm going to say await. This is going to be asynchronous. Await add to basket. Product ID. similar to my product store, I'm going to have a basket store in lib. Okay, basket store. This is going to be to basket. Right, for now, it's not going to return anything. But yeah, as I was saying before, we're going to be using Dynamo. So I'm going to need a DynamoDB client. In fact, I'm going to create here. That's totally not what I wanted. It's AWS document client. Now, to actually get that client, I need AWS. So I'm going to be installing that. So actually, let's do that first. Let's install AWS. So this is the AWS SDK. And that will give me a nice, like a really easy to use API to talk to DynamoDB. To start off with, we're going to be using the local, there's a locally installable kind of DynamoDB database that you can use, for your kind of your local development. But in order to use that, you need to pass this endpoint, which I believe by default is on localhost 8000. And since we're going to be adding to the basket, I think it's probably good to establish first what my DynamoDB table is going to look like, what kind of information we're going to store on it. So let's do that bit first. Right, let me pull this up here. And we're going to need DynamoDB local, as I was saying before. Package.json. Right, I'm going to add a little script here called db start. And that is going to start my DynamoDB local instance. Ignore the command, it's quite a long one, but basically it's going to look for the DynamoDB binary under my data folder. I don't have there yet, but I'm going to download it in a second. And it's going to start it for me. So we just need to add it here under data. To get it, it's going to literally Google it, DynamoDB local, setting up DynamoDB local. Let's just use this one. Right, let me copy it here. Okay, so that's my binary, hopefully. If I now do npm run db start, oops, that spins up Dynamo for me. Now, I found this little tool over the weekend actually called DynamoDB admin. There is like a built-in DynamoDB kind of UI that you can use locally, but I found it to be very bad, to be honest. So I installed this DynamoDB admin. It's an open source tool, and it gives you like a really easy way to create tables in Dynamo. For example, I'm going to create my table. I'm going to call it the basket table. And in Dynamo, you just have to specify a primary key or hash key and a range key. We're going to keep it really, really simple. I'm just going to have our primary key being the product ID, that long UUID that I have. And that is it. We're also going to be storing against each record in the table the quantity of how many of those products you have in the basket. I'm just going to go ahead and create that. So I've got my basket table there. Hopefully that's all we need in the Dynamo front for now. I'm going to go back to my basket store and start implementing the add to basket. So got some nice auto completion there. So it's going to be a basket table. So the plan is to I'm going to need a product ID there. The plan is just to increment by one the quantity of that product in the basket table. So all I need to specify is a product ID, which is the name of my primary key. I also need an update expression. And I think I can do this. I can say add to the quantity field a given quantity. And that given quantity I can specify here. Just going to say 1. And also I need to make sure that returns a promise. In fact, I don't need that to be a sync if it's just returning a promise. I think that is it. Let's go back to my API. All right, so we're getting a product ID. In fact, I'm not sure that's how we'll get that product ID, so I'm going to console log it. We await add to basket, and then we reply back. And I want to actually reply back to the client with all of the products in my basket so that it's easy for the client to update the contents of the basket. So I'm going to have that and say products or basket products get all get all from basket. Just call it that. Let's just call it basket products. Right, okay, let's try this. Close you. Let's copy one of these product IDs. That's not right. It needs to be basket/that. API/basket/product ID. That is interesting. Oh, add to basket is not exported from basket store. Of course. In fact, I can just export it here. Here. And we also need to implement get all from basket. Right, so for this, I'm going to do a scan from the whole table. So what that will do is read all of the items from Dynamo. rather than doing this, let's create a global table name variable. Okay. This needs to be a sync. So I'll give me all of the items in the database, and then bear in mind that in the database, we're only storing the product IDs and the quantity. So to get the full product data, what I'm gonna do is map those items to an actual kind of full product details. So I can do that by just looking at my product store. I think we've not implemented that yet. Right, so in the product store, actually, we have implemented that. Right, so we got Gale products, just gives you everything back. We are awaiting it, not that we really need to, but and then we map everything we got from database onto like the products that we have in the JSON file. So let's try that URL again. And in fact, that's giving me already an empty list. That's interesting. There's an internal server error there. Can I read property map of undefined? That's interesting. I think I know what that is. Yes, I need to. This needs to be. I always forget to do this when I'm working with the AWS SDK. Need to return a promise and then await that. There we go. Okay, so we're making a get. That's not ideal. I think ideally, whenever you're making changes in your backend, you want an HTTP post instead. But we'll see that in a second. But that is definitely talking to Dynamo. If I go to my admin page, I can see that for that product, I have 8 already from having hit that URL many times. Right, okay, so how do we then kind of link the front end to this API that we've just implemented? So we can do that by let's add the add to trolley support on the product list page. That's going to give me an event. So this is the add to basket button, for, by the way, and this is going to be add to trolley event, and then we also need to pass the product ID. A product ID. Right, and at this point, you can use your favorite HTTP client. I'm going to be using Fetch because Fetch is going to give it to you in browsers. You kind of get it for free, but also Next.js polyfill Fetch server side. It's got quite nice support for Fetch. So I'm just going to be going with that. Fetch, we know that the URL is going to be API/basket, and then the ID of my product. And I'm actually going to change the method to an HTTP post instead of a get, because that's more semantic. We know our response contains all of the basket items, so I'm going to await that. And then I'm going to need here some kind of update basket items so that the front end reflects how many basket items you have got. The little counter at the top right corner. So I think that is this done. Let's try it. Let's add a few products from my list. Oh, right. The event, right? Because I'm clicking the button, but I think the event is bubbling up to the product card. Therefore, whenever I click any of these buttons, it takes me to the product details, and I obviously don't want that. So what you could do there is event dot prevent something. Can't remember the exact API. Prevent event from bubbling. Stop propagation. That's the one. Stop propagation. Whoops. Hopefully that will do the trick. Right, okay, so it doesn't do that anymore. What I'm hoping now is to see these items being added into, there we go. Okay, so yeah, I can click it and it's definitely adding them to the basket. So you can see them all being added. So before I go any further, I'm conscious of time as well. I've already covered quite a bit, but there is quite a bit left as well to do. But yeah, we've seen how you can do routing. We've seen kind of the separation between how you do your pages front end and the back end, how you can do server-side rendering, and how you can use these API routes to implement your kind of custom backend APIs. The next bit I wanted to do is make sure whenever we click that add to trolley, it actually updates that little counter at the top. So let's do that real quick. So I have these update basket items there. What I'm planning to do is using the context API in React so that if I click add to trolley anywhere from these product cards, it updates the Navbar component, which is, it's not kind of the same level as this component is. So the context API, I think, could work quite nicely. So let's say use context. I'm gonna create a basket context, and that's gonna hold all of my basket items and this update basket items method. Let's add it here. Basket context. React create context. Okay, and then the next bit we need to do is in the app. We need the basket context provider. And in the values, I'm going to pass all of the basket items that I've got and update basket items. To the navbar, I'm going to pass the basket items. And then I'm going to use the length of the basket items to update the little counter at the top. We're going to keep track of my basket items by using the useState hook. Which I'm going to initialize to an empty array for now. And then update basket items is going to be use callback. And it's simply going to just call set basket items for me. Okie dokes. Set basket items. Okay, so I've got my basket provided there. Hopefully that's all I need at the top level app. Having the provider here, I'm not going to go into too much detail because of time, but it means that from anywhere, any page in my tree of components, I have access very easily to the basket, the items in the basket currently, and updating those as well. So I need that basket context. And I already have that. So I think the only bit left is make sure that my navbar is using this prop to update the little counter. Basket items. Basket items length. Okay, so that's already initialized to 0. Let me refresh the page, make sure. Yeah, so that's initialized to 0. Okay, that doesn't look very nice. What's going on there? Right, so there isn't anything there. Okay. See what basket items we're getting. Oh, okay, of course. Basket item, basket products. I know what's going on. So in the homepage, let's rewind a bit. You remember how in our API we're returning our basket products. In fact, I'm going to rename that to basket items to keep it consistent with the other calls. But that's returning an object. And what I get back here is that object. So let's call that data. And then data.basket items is actually what it gets passed there. There we go. And it's jumped to 13 because I already had a bunch of items in there. But if I purge the database, let's refresh. Right, a little counter updates. And what I was going to do next, but again, I'm conscious of time, and I want to show you a few more things, was refactoring this add to trolley, make it a custom hook, and then reusing that hook to implement this other add to trolley, so we could reuse that. But that's really a React thing. It's not specific to Next, so I'm not going to do that to save a little bit of time. Okay. Right, what shall we do next? Right, the next bit I wanted to show you was actually I wanted to do a Lighthouse run of this page. If you're not familiar with Lighthouse, it kind of measures the performance of your web app, and I wanted to do a quick run of it in our local app. See how that goes. See what kind of performance score we get. But for that, instead of running my development server, which is slow, I'm going to run the production one. And yeah, this has optimizations in place, so I get a better sense of how my app would perform in production. Whilst that is running, I'm going to open an incognito window. I would totally recommend you running Lighthouse in incognito to reduce variability of your tests due to extensions and things like that affect your Lighthouse score. Not that. Oh God, sorry. And even in incognito, sometimes you get invalid runs of Lighthouse. Hopefully, we'll be lucky this time. Right, so I'm just going to measure performance. I'm not going to look into this other criteria, but Next.js tends to do quite well on those actually without doing too much work. Right, so we've got our production build ready. Let's generate a report. Okay, so 77 performance. I actually was expecting slightly higher, but saying that, look at this. So properly sized images, that's quite a big one. In terms of potential savings, you have got a lot of potential savings. The problem is all of these images, I'm serving them in their original dimensions, which I think is 640 by 480. But reality is I don't need images that big for this page because the product cards use quite small images, and it's good practice to serve the image size, the exact image size that you need, so you save bandwidth. And Lighthouse is clearly kind of letting me know of that. Now, luckily for us, Next provides or has an image component which was introduced recently, actually, I think in Next.js 10. But the idea is that rather than you rendering the image yourself, you have this image component. You say where the image lives, and behind the scenes, in a backend of some kind, Next.js will resize the images on the fly for you to the dimensions that you give it. So, for example, here, I know that if I had, let's say, 126, it's actually responsive, so could be slightly bigger than that. Let's say 150 by 150 pixels. That would be much more efficient than serving like this the 640 by 480 pixels image. So let's look at that for product list. Doing it as well is quite an easy thing. So all I need to do is update this image element to be an image component. I can update my image component from next image. And I need to specify a width. Let's say it's going to be 150 and a height by 150. I think that's it. At this point, let me refresh. Oh, I need to rerun my build server, my production build, sorry. So it picks up those changes. But yeah, we'll run another Lighthouse run and see how it performs now. But I wanted to show you what the markup looks like. So Next.js generates a special kind of URL. And what it's doing is the Next.js server is resizing the image. But if you look into the docs on your own time, it also supports, I think they call it loaders. So you could load the image from your CDN. I think they support out of the box Akamai and possibly Cloudflare. I'm not sure. But it has support for kind of third-party CDNs, which would do the resizing for you. It's not something I've used myself, but I think it's quite handy. So that's finished now. Let's reload it. Yeah, so now the image is like this really long element, but the main thing is that you can see the source is _next/image, and then that kind of UID there. And that's an auto-generated URL that Next gives you. So let me do another run of Lighthouse. I'm actually going to close this incognito and open a fresh one. Let's generate another report. Nearly there. Okay, the performance is only slightly better. But you can see the image warning from before is gone now, and that is thanks to Next kind of resizing them for me. You could as well, I'm not going to do that, but you could as well for the product details see, what kind of size do I need for this page and serve that. And you can see how that approach scales for really nicely. Right, so that's one way of improving the performance of your web app. But there's another way which you could use, and that kind of, it gives you the opportunity to introduce you to static generation. So at the moment, we're server-side rendering all of these pages, the product list, the product details. Server-side rendering is good for SEO, but server-side rendering doesn't beat a pre-generated static HTML file. A static HTML file is something that you can serve directly from your CDN. It doesn't need any compute. It doesn't introduce any kind of backend latency for that to be generated. So I would actually recommend static site generation over server-side rendering whenever you can. Sometimes you cannot do that because you have requirements that kind of require you to have some kind of server-side rendering. But let me show you how static site generation, how we could use it in this web app. Before we do that, I want you to look at our build. So there's this special folder next called the .next folder, and that has all of the compilation output in it. And there's server pages. And you can see there is no HTML aside from the 404 and the 500 page. There's only this index.js, but there isn't a product list HTML. If I go to my product page, there isn't a product details HTML. And the reason for that is because Next is server-side rendering those, right? It uses literally Node to server-side render the React and output the HTML on the fly. But let's say that we know ahead of time what our products are, what all of the information for the products is. We want to, at compile time, when I'm compiling my app, generate all of those product details pages, for each individual product, and the HTML for the product listing as well. And literally that will make it a static application, something that you can put in an S3 bucket, for example, and then have CloudFront serving those assets. You don't need, a Lambda or an EC2 instance or anything for that. It's a really cheap and fast way of delivering a web application. So how can you do that in Next? Let's do it for the product list first. So I'm going to comment this out, the server-side rendering approach, and I'm going to do a different method. And this is also a special method in Next. It's called getStaticProps. And this is really short for static site generation, SSG. And the logic here is going to be pretty much the same, really. We want to get all of our products, and we want to return them as props. The difference is that this will run at compile time, get static props, and get server-side props runs at runtime. So it runs in some kind of backend. You need a compute for that, whether it's an EC2 instance or a Lambda function or whatever you want to use. So it should literally be this, doing that. So I'm going to run my dev server first, make sure that nothing has broken. It's a little bit slow, that. Let's open a new tab. There we go. Yeah, so my product list page renders, same as if I was server-side rendering. However, if I look let me do a build first. If I look at my build output, what I will find is an HTML, a pre-compiled HTML page that you could literally grab, put on your S3 bucket and serve it directly, kind of ready to use. So let's see that from Next, server, pages. You can see that index.html there, which wasn't there before when we were server-side rendering. Now, how does that work for the product details page? Product details is a bit of a special case because obviously there can be many products. You could have millions of products. So what does that mean for things like build time? What does it even mean, from kind of the files that are generated? Let's try it. So I go to product ID. Have that there. And let me comment, get server-side props. Okay, and I probably don't even need that here. Okay, so get static props. Let's do a build. Yeah, okay, so we get an error. It's saying get static paths is required for dynamic statically generated pages, and it's missing for that page. Right, what Next is telling us here is, okay, you're telling me to pre-render all of your product details pages, but I don't know what those pages are. So you have to tell it. And the way you do that is by using get static props in combination with get static paths. And this is something you only need if you have a dynamic segment in your root, like product ID. We already have a way to get all of our products, get all products. Oops. And all we need to do is you need to tell Next, so it has actually, let's call that paths. You need to tell Next what those paths are, and the format of that is something like this. So you basically get an array there of params objects, and each param object represents a page that needs to be pre-rendered, a product details page that needs to be pre-rendered. There's also this flag that you have to pass. I'm going to say false for now, and I'll explain in a second what that flag is. But let's run build again. I should probably delete those console logs, but ignore them for now. So that's compiled successfully. If I do server pages product, okay, so you have all of the HTML files for each product details page, pre-generated and ready to use. There is clearly a trade-off here. I think that's the main takeaway. I think you should favor using statically generated pages when you can. Obviously, if you have millions of these products and you need to pre-render them, that would, the build times would be crazy. And this maybe wouldn't be a viable choice. However, saying that, this fallback flag here that I'm setting to false, if I had this set to true, you could actually tell Next, I only want to pre-render this specific set of paths. The rest of them that are not pre-rendered, I want you to give me a spinner client side and almost lazily pre-render them. So once the page is rendered, you get that little spinner, and in the background, it computes the page. So you could see how you could have an approach where you are pre-rendering a part of your more important pages, and then the rest of them you could kind of lazily pre-render them. Let's take a quick look at the docs, because I might be missing some things. Yeah, so the docs are quite comprehensive. They have a lot of information in them. But get static props also supports this not found flag, like get server props did. And it has a couple more things that you could pass to it. And that's static site generation. You could also see how you can have a hybrid approach. You could maybe pre-render some pages, and you could keep, for example, so you could maybe pre-render your product list page, and if you wanted to server-side render your product details page, then you could do it. And this is why Next is a really flexible framework compared to other frameworks out there. It gives you a toolbox of things, and you use whichever is more convenient to you. Right, so let me put this back in there. Right, so we've covered off static site generation. I think all I have got left is right in time. I've only got like 14 minutes left. Is deploying to Vercel. Let's try that and see how that goes. I know, however, that for that to work, I need to update my basket store, which I've got my lib folder. So at the moment, I'm using this local copy of Dynamo, but I want to use a real DynamoDB table. So I'm going to say if my node.env is development, only then use the local copy of Dynamo, otherwise use Dynamo document client. And I think I also need another bit, Vercel AWS credentials. Yeah, I also need to update my credentials so that Vercel has access to my AWS account. I don't think I need that region. I do need the region here though. Right, so I have already created those keys in my Vercel account. So it should just be good to go. What should we do next? Right, what I'm going to do next is create this table in my AWS account, and the table is called basket table. Let's do that real quick. Almost there. Right, here we go. I think I already have one table in there, but it's named differently. Right, my basket. Yeah, I was trying this before. I'll create a new one. Just the basket table. And with our primary keys, product ID, and I think that's all we need. That's being created for me now. So I guess all that is left at this point is deploying. Make sure that the app builds before I deploy it. Whilst that is running, let me do something else. See if I can log into my Vercel account. Oh, I'm already there. Okay, so that compiles fine. So to deploy your app to Vercel is so simple. That's why I wanted to use Vercel over other options. I think all I need to do is that I already have the Vercel CLI globally installed. So just need to follow these steps, deploy to that, link to an existing project. Yes, I already have an existing project, so I'm just going to reuse that. And whilst that is deploying, let me show you what the Vercel dashboard looks like. So I've got my next e-commerce project there. Gives you like this fancy little preview, gives you a URL to where your app will be hosted. I think, yeah, if I go to settings, I have my environment variables configured with my AWS credentials. That way, the lambdas that Vercel deploys to have access to my DynamoDB table. Should be done soon enough. Whilst that is running, actually, just to briefly cover deployment options with Next, you can use Vercel, and that's probably the easiest. And it has really good developer experience. I think they give you like a free plan, but if you wanted to scale your application, you probably have to go for a paid plan. There are a couple of other options. There's Netlify, and also there's an open source project that you can take a look at as well, called Serverless Next.js, which I actually work on, and that allows you to deploy your Next.js app onto your own AWS account. It's free, it's open source, and yeah, it's kind of maintained by the community. So yeah, you can check that out. So that's deployed now. Let's open it. Okay, and that opens. Let's see if that works. It does work. Very good. Just so to make sure I'm not faking it, go to the basket. Whoops. Okay, the basket page for a foreign. Oh, that's interesting. Do I have any items here? I do have items. That is interesting. Why would that be for a foreign? I'm not sure actually, unless I broke something when I was talking about static site generation. So I've got this site props. I think I probably did. Basket page. Oh, actually, of course, I didn't actually add the basket page, and we're running out of time. But it's a shame. Like the next bit was going to be adding that basket page and seeing the list of items, but we only got 5 minutes to for the full 2 hours. But yeah, you can see how the basket page, you could server-side render it. You could just kind of use all of the features that we've seen from Next to build it, and then just add another basket page here under your pages folder. The reason why it's 404 is because I haven't implemented. I thought I had. But yeah, the rest of it should still work, and the little counter also works. which is good. Just before I finish, let me quickly have a bit of a recap I have ready here. Yeah, so just to really quickly recap, we've seen how to use Next.js routing. In other words, really how to use your link component to link between different pages and do your client-side navigation. The use router hook whenever you need a bit more control. Dynamic routes, how that works. Custom error pages, we've seen how to do that with a 404 page. How to implement backend APIs using your API routes, server-side rendering, static site generation, and optimizing images as well. We didn't cover incremental static site generation. Built-in CSS support, there was a lot more to talk about in there. Next also supports TypeScript out of the box, which, due to time, we couldn't do those, but, feel free to look at them in your own time. And that's it. That's me done.